Hi everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of Genre Equality's Behold podcast. I'm Hidzir.
I'm Isa.
We have a very enemy-heavy episode for you today. Our main topic is a popular manga slash anime. There have been two animes with this title, Hellsing and Hellsing Ultimate, and we'll be delving into the differences between the two animes, which one is better, and why the Hellsing title has become such a legacy title in the anime world, especially with regards to gory, dark, fantasy,
hmm
horror kind of anime. Next up, then when I recommend to Isa and Isa recommends to me that section, I'll be talking about Sally Rooney's Normal People, which is an acclaimed novel and also has been recently adapted into a Hulu television series, a
hmm
mini series actually. And then Isa has recommended to me a very witty, very snarky, slice of life anime called My Teen Romantic Comedy SNAFU. Although there is another title for it, right? It's a very long title for it.
Yeah, I think it's called My Youth Romantic Comedy is Wrong as I Expected. There's like multiple names for it, but in the
Yep.
fandom, like it's the abbreviations. I think it's Hamachi or Oregaru. I think. But yeah, Snafu is just kind of like the easiest for me lah, at least.
Indeed, indeed, yeah. But just for our viewers, if you never heard of this anime and you have trouble searching for it, just be aware that it goes by two titles.
Yep.
Yep. So I mean, I think the manga is the latter title, right? The super long one.
Yeah, the manga is a super long one. I think
Yep.
if you just search My Teen Romantic Comedy Snafu,
Yep.
you'll get pretty much like hits for all three seasons.
Nice, yes, and it is currently in its third season, entitled Climax. Be aware that we have not actually seen the final three episodes of it,
Yeah.
but we're going to be talking about the show as a whole, like more broadly. Like it's not a season three review per se.
hmm
It's more of a series review and what makes it good. But first, I mean, anyways, let's begin with Helsing slash Helsing Ultimate. So Isa, like since you're the one who suggested the main topic, which I really enjoyed and it's available on Netflix right now.
Yep.
Tell us like what housing and then housing ultimate means to you and why there was this difference between these two enemies.
Okay. So for me, I discovered Hellsing in secondary school. I have a very distinct memory of a classmate of mine, who was very into anime as well, and we used to watch anime together all the time.
Yep.
He got a hold of Vampire Hunter D and
Yeah.
Hellsing DVDs,
Mm-hmm.
right? And at that point in time, it had just come out, so like the DVDs had just come out. I believe Hellsing screened earlier in that year on Japanese TV.
Yeah.
And we binge watched pretty much the whole of Hellsing at
12
one go
episodes,
at
right?
at his
Yeah.
place, right? Like it was a afternoon to night kind of thing.
Yeah, it's only 6 hours actually. It's a half hour, 12 episode binge, so it's pretty quick
Yeah,
actually.
so it was really really quick. And I remember being very kind of like taken by that. Right at that point in time, I don't think I was exposed to too much of the
Mm,
gore stuff that we get in anime.
mm,
And I did. I was very taken by kind of like the imagery, the symbolism, just how everything was aesthetically. I think like Helsing at that point in time had a very distinct look to it.
mm.
Um, and yeah, so I really really kind of enjoyed that and continue to kind of like revisit every once in a while, every couple of years, right? Especially when someone came to me asking for like what I want to watch, like a vampire thing or like a dark kind of like gory anime. Usually Helsing would be at the top of my list.
Yep.
So that was wow, 2002, I think 2001 2002,
Correct. Yep.
when Helsing came out. And then a couple of years later,
Five actually, 2006.
is it 2006? Is that when the first episode came out? Yeah. So I
Yeah.
I heard that they were gonna do a kind of like a remake. At that point in time, like they weren't really sure. Like it was going to be a series of OVAs,
Mm,
fronted by Madhouse. And what they were going to do is that they were going to take their time with it just to make sure that it got kind of like the fullest treatment possible. So every episode basically took 6 months to make,
mm.
right? So it eventually became me watching out for every episode every 6 months over the course of like 6 years.
Yep.
all the way till 2012, I think. And
Correct.
I think there
Yeah.
was something about that kind of wait that we had back then. Like, obviously now, if you told me I have to wait 6 months for an episode, I would be fairly unhappy about that. But back then, just because every release felt like its own event, right? Like you would get two releases in a year, right?
Mm.
And it was a big deal, and anyone who was a fan of Hellsing, would be talking about it. And once it came out, like everyone would watch it and they'll talk about it as well. That in and of itself, like, felt really, uh, really quite special, right? I think as far as the anime fandom went, right? Because it was I think it's probably the first time that they did that,
Yeah.
in recent memory, to have this kind of a structure to it.
Very unusual.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, I fell in love with the original series, and like I do feel like Ultimate did have some pretty interesting improvements on it, or additions to it rather. I won't necessarily say that it's better than the original series,
Mm.
per se, but that's kind of like my journey of discovery of the franchise itself, and like kind of like getting to know the characters, and like that going into like a multi-year kind of like affair with the series.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, from just what I've like, slight research that I've done on Hellsing, apparently it was based on Kouta Hirano's Hellsing manga, which
Yep.
was published in 1997. And then it was an ongoing manga at the time, so hadn't quite finished.
Yep.
And then just 4 years later, in 2001, as Isa mentioned, the first Hellsing anime came out. It was fairly well regarded, lah, but I guess in terms of the haste of the adaptation, meant a bit like Hunter x Hunter.
Yeah.
It kind of burnt through the available source material very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And then I guess the second half of the anime, the last 6 episodes, veered off into an original storyline for the rest of the runtime.
Yeah.
I mean, some people liked it. I guess the manga fans didn't like it. So I guess that's what prompted 5 years later for a brand new series to go into production. I got Ultimate. So I think Ultimate was trying to be a more faithful adaptation to the original manga,
For sure.
which at that time was already drawing to a close, so they got the full story already. And as you mentioned, the release format so unusual. 10 1 hour long OVAs releasing over 6 different years by 3 different studios. Certainly broke the mold, but the staggering quality of the results, in terms of the animation,
Yep.
uh, made the lengthy wait, I guess, more than worth it. Like, obviously, I didn't experience it that way. I watched both back to back, including the little mini series, The Dawn,
The
which was
Dawn.
released,
Yeah.
which coincided with Ultimate, and it served as a little bit of a short film backstory to Alucard's history, lah.
Hmm.
But like The Dawn isn't necessary viewing. It's nice to see, to
Yeah. For
complete the
sure.
story,
Yeah.
but it's more of a compliment lah than anything else. Um, so yeah, like you don't think that Helsing or Helsing Ultimate is one or the other is superior? Because I've heard that a very divisive takes on this online.
I mean, in terms of the craft of it, right? Like making anime itself, I do feel like Housing Ultimate has much better footing, right? Just in terms of the quality of animation, quality of the soundtrack, the voice acting, and just sheer spectacle, right? I
Mm.
think probably one of the most uh glorious and goriest climatic battles, like mass
Yep.
scale battles that we've seen in animation. Very
Mm.
few anime reach those heights, where at the same time, like it's such a it's a horrible and terrible and beautiful thing to watch at the same time. And
Mm-hmm.
they spread it out. Like I felt the pacing was okay. Like having rewatched it recently for the podcast as well. Like
Mm.
having done it over 6 years, as well as having done it in a row. I do feel the pacing kind of stands up to both kind of viewing experiences.
Mm.
Um, so if we're talking about the craft of it, right, like just making gorgeous looking anime, I do feel like Ultimate definitely has a step up.
Mm.
But we can also put that to like a much bigger budget, much more focused kind of like a story adaptation from the manga itself,
Yeah, the source
and
material
just
was
like
there. Yeah.
a lot of time, right,
Mm-hmm.
for them to do that. And it felt a lot like a labor of love, right? Because at the end of the day, like these things don't get the kind of airtime that normal series do,
Mm-hmm.
and at the same time, like it's only at the point in time when it was coming out, the only very small kind of dedicated fan base gave a shit
Yeah.
about what was
Yeah.
going on. uh I do feel, however, that like at the end of the day, because I fell in love with the original Hellsing, and I do feel that the original series also had a lot of like character moments that you don't get from Ultimate.
Mm.
There's a bit more silliness there. There are a bit more like comedic moments that you get there that I found to be helpful in your viewing, right? Like it endears you to the characters a bit more than kind of the grim, dark version that you get. I mean, there's some moments of humor with or comedic relief with Sarah's,
Yep.
but those feel kind of forced given the entire tone of the
Mm.
of the thing. Whereas I think like as an early like late 90s, early 2000s product, the
Yep.
original Helsing felt a lot more like a product of its time, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
a bit more slapstick there, here and there, and a bit more like comedic relief, and that was enjoyable in a very kind of different way, I feel.
Yeah, yeah. If you aren't aware, like the premise is, vampires exist. In specifically the show takes place in England, lah.
Yep.
And it's kind of the duty of Helsing, which is not a person. It's not about Helsing the vampire hunter. It's a secret organization, sponsored by the British government to hide the frightening fact that vampires exist, and protect the kind of blissfully unaware populace, lah.
Yep.
So along with its own personal army, Helsing has secret weapons, particularly Alucard, an incredibly powerful vampire who has been controlled by Helsing for a century now.
Hmm.
It is unclear how he feels about being a servant to the Helsing family, but he certainly enjoys his job as a vampire exterminator.
Yep.
Saras, the side character, as you mentioned earlier, is a fledgling vampire and a former policewoman. Although reluctant to embrace a new self, she is and it comes to be a valued member of the organization.
Hmm.
The Helsing crew is led by Integra Helsing, the current leader.
Yep.
She is fully capable of fulfilling her duty. But lately, vampire activity has been on the rise. The cause is quite alarming. More so than just vampires just turning other people into vampires.
Yep.
Apparently there are these microchips that turn normal humans into vampires, basically synthetic vampires. Plus, there's also Nazis and werewolves and uh, religious crusaders from the Catholic Church as villains as well. So it's a very like a very pulpy, very crazy, very blood soaked kind of anime lah. One thing I do have to say about Hellsing
Yep.
is that it touched upon more of the synthetic vampires, which was an interesting concept,
Yeah, it was.
which wasn't paid off in the show, lah, unfortunately,
Yeah.
because it paid off somewhere else. So I think based on the just by by the fact that the Hellsing original series didn't have a story, at least didn't conclude the story,
Yeah.
and then veered off into another story that
Had
towards the
nothing to
end,
do. Yeah.
yeah, that had nothing to do with it and didn't quite make much sense in terms of the cohesion of a full tale. I didn't quite enjoy it as much as Hellsing Ultimate, which was as one story from beginning to end, told in
Uh-huh.
very epic scale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I totally understand like where you're coming from, I think especially watching them in close proximity to each other will definitely you would see those differences quite um obviously.
Yep.
Uh
Yeah.
yeah. So I don't know if I personally can pick one over the other, but I feel like if people only have time for one, then Hellsing Ultimate is kind of the way to go. And then if you're
Mm,
interested, you can kind of go and see their kind of first attempt at that, right?
mm,
I'm not sure if it's necessarily because it's closer to the manga itself, necessarily.
yep.
It's just that a lot of time has gone into the making of this series,
Yeah.
and a lot of care as well. So that in of itself, it has become kind of like this giant of its own, right? Like no one would have thought that someone would pull off like a kind of a 6 year multi-part saga,
Mm,
and for it to have grown in the kind of like popularity that it has,
yeah.
is fairly important. And given the time that it happened in, I think that we have to be aware that a lot of the succeeding properties that came out, right, of the same view, like Castlevania, for example. Like it's very hard to watch
Hmm.
Castlevania right now and not think about Helsing.
Correct. Yeah, I understand that Castlevania is based on a video game. I can hear people already saying that lah.
Yeah.
Yes, Castlevania is based on a video game, but Castlevania in tone and style,
Mm-hmm.
did not take that from the video game. The video game had none of that tone and style.
Yep.
It took it, I mean, quite clearly lah, upon watching Hellsing. It's not a ripoff, just homage
Yeah.
and influenced by, in a very big way, by Hellsing.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think like it kind of Helsing has kind of set the tone for a lot of that. I think especially vampire based stuff, though
Mm.
we haven't really got that much of that recently in anime. I mean, there were a few here and there that were okay, and you can also see the influences of Helsing on them, but like I don't think anything has kind of reached kind of the heights that we have, with maybe the exception of Vampire Hunter D, which is a classic in and of itself.
Mm. Well, I would say, like, I mean, it doesn't have vampires in it, but in terms of tone and style, maybe the recent Devilman Crybaby owes a lot to Hellsing as well.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think oh man, what's the creator's name? I forgot. He's a big
We
fan.
Yeah, we recently reviewed a bunch of his stuff also. Yeah,
Yeah, he's a big fan.
yeah,
I've seen him do like I've seen him do like a tribute art and stuff like that as well. So it's pretty cool.
right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was very taken by the stylishness and the high quality of the animation.
Mm.
It's very aware that it is pulp, and is unafraid to go for it lah. I suppose it's a bit like I would equate it to like The Sopranos in terms of its influence, because
Oh,
I think The Sopranos doesn't really, the people would say that The Sopranos is a greater show than, say, The Americans, for example. But
okay.
like, one show couldn't exist without the
Yeah.
other, and a lot of people are willing to overlook the flaws of The Sopranos,
Hmm.
because it pioneered the style and the tone of the prestige drama. So it was kind of going into uncharted territory. It was breaking ground. It was uh it was it was creating something new lah, and something different, and something a bit more adult and mature.
Yeah.
And there were some missteps along the way, clearly, because when you're pioneering, you don't have a roadmap. They made the roadmap, and I think Helsing made the roadmap for a lot of these type of stylish Devilman Crybaby-esque enemies, because if you want to nitpick into like flaws, I think both shows have their own flaws. I mean, I
Yep.
already
For sure.
mentioned like Helsing is a bit of an incomplete story,
Hmm.
despite being very tonally and visually arresting,
Yeah.
and a bit inconsistent. But and Helsing Ultimate also has its own flaws.
Yeah.
I think some people can come to it thinking that it's overlong.
Hmm.
Can come to it thinking that maybe the villains are very underdeveloped. They're kind of cackling maniacs with no real
Yeah.
motivation and nuance to them.
Hmm.
But I do have to point out to, I mean, perhaps those naysayers, that yeah, I mean, those points are valid, but it's also pulp lah, and this is what pulp is lah,
Mhm.
and this is pulp at the highest quality.
Yeah, I do. I mean, like, I do feel that a lot more could have been done in terms of like the character work, right?
Yep.
I feel like watching both the original series and Ultimate, uh, together give you kind of a better idea of the world building.
Mm,
Because there's a bit more character development, and some would say maybe in the wrong direction, in
right.
Helsing itself, right? But you kind of like get a better sense of the world and the people and everybody's place in the world itself. And I think
Hmm.
that's where um the Dawn comes in, right?
Yep.
Because it does give us a backstory, a look at the villains, a look at Alucard himself and Walter, who played like really really big roles. Um,
Walter's turn in Hellsing Ultimate, very poorly explained,
mm,
but with the context of the Dawn, you kind of get more of an idea why he turns. I mean, I'm
yep,
not trying to spoil anything, but
yep.
there is a big betrayal that happens in the middle of the show, which I was a bit perplexed by, because the show didn't explain
Yeah.
it.
So
Yeah.
did you finish Ultimate first before you watched the Dawn?
I was watching it in chronological order. So when
Ah, right,
I was
right.
watching, like after this episode of Ultimate is released, and then I saw on Wikipedia, oh, the Dawn was released here, so I was watching it concurrently lah, in
Okay,
chronological
okay.
order. Yeah.
Yep.
So I wasn't confused, but I could see how people may be confused.
Yeah, I think because for me, this time around rewatching, I watched the Dawn after I finished Ultimate,
Mm,
and I think I did watch it chronologically when it came out. So there
right.
was a moment it's like, oh wow, that feels like really clunky, right?
Yep.
It's literally not explained. Like he goes away with a friend and shows up in the next episode as a foe.
Mm,
And it kind of like I was like, oh really? Did it feel that shocking? The first time around, and I kind of realized why only
mm-hmm.
much later on. Yeah.
I do have to say also that with Hellsing and Hellsing Ultimate, specifically with Hellsing Ultimate, I much preferred the English voice cast. I know it's a bit of heresy to say dub better than sub, but considering where the show is set,
Hmm.
where
Yep.
the series is set in Britain, and the fact that that they should be speaking English, and the fact that the English voice casts are all British,
Yep.
it kind of makes it a bit more of an immersive experience.
I think for
So
large parts of it, that is very, very true. Except there are portions whereby, like, the animation very
yeah,
clearly doesn't match what's being said.
yep,
Like the mouth movements and stuff like that. But if you can look past that, it is, for all intents and purposes, a very good dub.
yep, yeah. I mean, because like it just felt weird to me like to watch this like white people speak in Japanese.
Yeah. It happens more often than you think it would. Like, I just finished Great Pretender, which we'll be covering in our next episode of genre,
Yep.
and they have the same problem. The dub is pretty good.
Mm.
It's not bad, but I chose to watch subs, and like they just conveniently kind of had everything get translated, via universal translator to Japanese.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
That being said, I do feel like, because I've watched both the sub and dub versions for Helsing Ultimate over
Mm-hmm.
the years, because sometimes like I could only get a whole of the dub,
Mm.
and then I would later kind of rewatch it. I do feel like certain uh tonally certain characters feel different with the English voice acting. I think Anderson in particular didn't feel quite as vile
Mm.
in the English dub. Like, I feel that, like, the Japanese voice actor who played him, I can't remember
Mm-mm.
his name, what really kind of like nailed that
I
that kind
think
of
there's
like,
something very charming about a Scottish accent. It's just hard to hate.
yeah, like, it it had a completely different spin on the character for me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
With a
Yeah.
Scottish voice actor. Whereas I feel like, what's his name here? Wakamoto Norio, like his version of Anderson is just like, it makes my skin crawl,
Mm-hmm.
and also, but it definitely works for a lot of the other ones. I think, like, Alucard for sure, Integra as well. Like, all of that felt pretty good in the English version, and it's
Mm-hmm.
just so interesting that the dub and sub version will give you such like different perspectives on the same character.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess it's the voice actor's prerogative lah to interpret the lines, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Agreed.
like you like watching it both times, in subs and dubs, you get to see basically two different actors perform the lines are the same
Yeah.
lines. So you basically get two different interpretations of the show if you want to lah.
There are just moments. I think, I do feel that the dub version didn't feel as melodramatic as times, which may or may not
Mm.
be a good thing, right? Given how pulpy it's supposed to be.
But it's very
Um,
grand and very operatic, and it's not. It's big and bold. It's about as subtle as a Ford Mustang. It's all very muscle and
yeah,
blood.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I think one moment that stands out to me where I thought the dub was definitely superior was, what's on, Rip Van Winkle's kind of like monologuing on the ship before he she gets attacked.
Right. Yeah.
That is way better in English than it is in Japanese.
Yeah, yeah, and trust me, there is a lot of monologuing in the show, much in a pulp tradition.
Yep.
So it's enjoyable if you can like you need to be in a certain mindset to really like enjoy it, and I urge you to just get into the pulp mindset, like because if you want to nitpick the long monologues and the over explaining and the everything else and or the characters are two dimensional, you're kind of missing the point here. Like
Yep.
it's like you're watching like the Quentin Tarantino's like grindhouse films, expecting a Tarantino work and not a homage to grindhouse.
Yeah.
Because the genre is like this lah, and this is the highest representation I can think of lah of the genre because it's very bombastic, it's very grandiose in many ways. The negatives are so intertwined with the positives. It's almost hard to pull them apart. Because the positive is the negative in many respects. It kind of depends on where you come from and your mindset.
Yep. Yep. For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. And I think maybe the only other thing, like, as far as, um like, Helsing is very much more dark fantasy than it is a vampire story, right? Just because, like,
Mm.
we have those elements there, sure. And we got Alucard, who we know is who we eventually find out, his background and all of that. But the
Mm.
lore and the mythology behind that isn't very strong
Yep.
necessarily, right? Like we get glimpses of it, there are references to it, but we never really quite get like the meaty kind of like, oh, okay, this is what vampires are, this is how they're made, and this are
Mm.
what the rules of the world are, right? Like essentially you have this giant enigma surrounding who Alucard is and how powerful he actually is, and that kind of blows everything else out of the water. Like it doesn't matter so long as you know that he is on a power scale that is pretty unimaginable for most people.
Yep.
And that kind of like dismisses the need for any sort of explanation or explication in terms of vampire lore.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I mean, it wasn't important for me to get the law, like, considering the tone of the show, because the show clearly wanted to be like balls to the wall, insane action, like all the time. It goes from 0 to 100 in the first episode,
Yeah.
Like in fact, episode one of Hellsing Ultimate pretty much covers like everything in Hellsing.
Yeah, everything in the first half of
And
Helsing. Yeah.
yeah, at least the manga side that Helsing adapted, lah,
Yeah.
And from then on, you get a totally different story. So if you're worried about Helsing and Helsing Ultimate being too similar, actually they're not, lah.
They're not. Yeah.
It's very very different stories with different villains even.
Yeah, definitely. We don't get the ultimate villain blah. The eventual villain in Helsing Ultimate, like that everything leads up to that, right? But we don't get
The
any of that.
Nazis,
Yeah, the Nazis.
yeah,
Yeah. So I think all in all, I just really wanted us to kind of talk about like it since it's on Netflix now, and I feel like people are wondering what's the difference between the two. Is it worth a watch? Why is it when I mention this to people who watch anime, they're like, oh yeah, like Helsing is of the prestige that it is right now, right? And
right, yeah,
just wanted people kind of like go and check it out, because if you enjoy pulpy stuff, if you enjoy like the kind of like dark fantasy, and the gore and like the hyper stylishness of that we get in a lot of anime today, then it's very easy to kind of point people back to say like, so well, chances are, they took inspiration from this from Helsing Ultimate.
yeah. I mean, House and Ultimate like really laid the groundwork for a lot of these shows. At least the dark fantasy shows that people seem to be in love with today and are made so often. I think in summary, it's just a blood soaked romp.
Yeah.
It's perhaps not intellectual, but it is the pinnacle of action anime. It
Mm,
provides non-stop thrills from beginning to end, and well worth sinking your teeth into.
yeah.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. Both shows and the Dawn, and perhaps one of these days if I'm free, I'm gonna go read the manga as well.
Yeah, I haven't actually finished the manga. I think like that wasn't really very high on my list. I
Right.
do I do hear that there's a fair bit more character work in the manga itself.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, and a lot of like more background and more history for each of the characters. So yeah, I think that's worth checking out.
Definitely, man. And yes, as I said, as mentioned, both shows, not just Ultimate, both shows, Helsing and Helsing Ultimate, are on Netflix right now. And everyone out there has Netflix. If you don't, you're lying. You probably have your friend's account. So go watch Helsing. It's a very easy, fun, brisky watch. It won't take up too much of your time.
Yeah.
And if you think it takes up too much of your time, I mean, think about the people like Isa who spend fucking like 6 years waiting for the show, to complete. Insane release schedule. It actually reminds me a lot of like some comics out there, where
Yeah.
the artists are so like, their paintings are and drawings are so intricate that you get like 6 month delays from issue to issue.
Mm-hmm.
Except like this is way better than just pen to paper. This is a full on audio visual spectacle. Brilliant stuff. Helsing Ultimate and Helsing. I'll recommend them both. Although I think for me personally, is Helsing Ultimate is the better show. But for those with a nostalgia for Helsing,
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that Helsing kickstarted it all, I fully understand why some people might think that Helsing is the better show.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. Um, Weirdly enough, actually, right, all three shows on our Behold episode this week are all adaptations from literature.
Oh
Strangely
yeah.
enough, yeah. Next up, we'll be talking about Hulu's mini series called Normal People. It is based on Sally Rooney's acclaimed 2018 novel. It's a breathtaking adaptation of a transcendent Irish love story.
Uh-huh.
Did you manage to finish the show? Or in and if not, like, because I don't want to spoil you, lah.
Okay. I am currently at episode 9. So
Okay.
like last three episodes.
Okay.
But the thing is, like, you don't have to worry about spoiling me for it. I already read through like kind of the synopsis of the last couple of ones just to make sure. I felt like if I did not, it would be a little difficult to kind of discuss where it was going.
Mm.
Because like episode 9 is pretty like it's very clear that, like, there's stuff that hinges on what happens after episode 9. Unfortunately, I didn't manage to finish the last three episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
Oh yeah, I
uh
mean that's totally okay. Like I was okay with talking about it more broadly lah. But
okay.
since you know what happens at the end, it's fine. There isn't it. This isn't like a spoiler kind of show. There aren't like big twists. It's not
Yeah,
Game of Thrones or anything.
yeah.
It is this very uncannily smart, like emotionally sophisticated, very seductively melancholy series that presents a grand romance that is as immersive and intimate as the book that inspired it, particularly because Sally Rooney herself wrote a majority of the scripts.
Oh.
Um, so it spans from a secondary school in the small town of Sligo to the young adult lives of the main characters at Trinity College in Dublin. Lah. So it steeps us into the heads of the female lead is a Marianne, played by Daisy Edgar Jones,
Mm-hmm.
and the male lead is Connell, played by Paul Mescal. Two lovers who try and fail and try and fail and try and fail to resist the magnetic pull between them. Lah. So when we first meet them as teenagers, Marianne is this very sharp-witted, prickly-tongued social outcast, mocked for her intelligence and wealthy upbringing. Connor, although, is just as smart and as studious as she is,
Mm-hmm.
but is popular due to his working class roots and his status as a handsome and outgoing jock. So, although they are unlikely to interact in school, Connell's mother, Lorraine, works as a housekeeper at Marian's palatial family home,
Yep.
which gives them a chance to develop a genuine connection until um, social pressures crush their blossoming romance, like in the most hurtful way possible, without giving any spoilers.
Yeah.
Many years later, they both wind up in the same college in the big city. So they are beyond the familial and small-minded constraints of their home community, and interestingly, their roles have reversed. With her as kind of the bright and effervescent social butterfly in a crowd of intellectuals, and him very brilliant yet introspective loner, incapable of making friends.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout the duration of this about 10 to 12 year long story, they drift in and out of each other's lives, sometimes as lovers, sometimes as friends, sometimes in big and dramatic ways, and sometimes in small but no less impactful gestures. Maybe they talk through Skype, or maybe they email each other. He is periodically awful to her without meaning to be, and
Yeah.
and she has a tendency to pull away for reasons beyond her control. But yet they kind of share this kind of intense sexual chemistry, but also a weakness for living too much into their own hits.
Mm.
So you have not read the book, right? So just as a show, like what do you think about Normal People on Hulu?
Oh wow. It is, it's pretty heart wrenching to kind of see this happen again and again and again.
Mm-hmm.
Just like two people coming together, and my main question at this point, right, like without having watched the last three episodes, are they actually good for each other? And
Mm.
it's all the time and effort and tears and all of that, and heartbreak over the years that they've had. Like, is it worth it? Right. That is,
Mm-hmm.
to me, the big looming question as I go into, the last quarter of the series, and essentially what the finale is supposed to be.
Yep.
Um, it is. I feel like it's a very well paced, a very nuanced, a very subtle presentation of how complex love can be, and love
Mm.
in many respects can be between two people. And the exploration of that over like so many years gives it a lot of time to kind of breathe, and for people, giving the audience a bit of time to breathe, to kind of like come to terms with, like, it's not as clear cut as it may seem. Like every instance uh of their love affair, right, for lack of a better term, like
Mm-hmm.
every instance of it like has its own circumstances surrounding it, right?
Yep.
And while you have a true line through all of that, given their history, and it gets more complicated as it goes on, right, the circumstances are pretty new, are pretty fresh, right? Like if we go from the circumstances in high school to the one in college, like those are two vastly different circumstances, in if inverse circumstances, if you want to look at it that way.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I feel the series gives it the characters and the audience enough time to kind of like come to terms with those circumstances,
Yeah.
get to know what the context of what's going on is first before coming to the conflict.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's not always the case, right, for a lot of series, and that's something that normal people does extremely well.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Like much of what normal people presents is delicate, very extremely interior material. At times told in leisurely sequences where we simply watch one or both of them lost in thought. And at other times it's quick impressionistic bursts, conveying the rush of feeling brought on by the latest complication between them. Lah.
Yep.
So the showrunner Alice Birch and of course the novelist Sally Rooney, I think they find wonderful visual and tonal ways to illustrate the internal and external divisions,
Hmm.
both perceived and felt, of these characters without the aid of Rooney's gorgeously written prose.
Yeah.
So like a lot of the prose is conveyed basically with body and facial language.
Hmm.
So much is visceral and implied, and it hinges upon a pair of magnificent performances.
Oh yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Hmm.
Edgar Jones and Mescal, like they quickly click into Marianne and Connell's unspoken bond of shared disquiet and palpable passion. Neither of them are actually particularly verbose, so it's not like Before Sunrise, But their shorthand with each other kind of becomes a language all on its own. So
Yep.
with every episode, you learn to read their moods and micro expressions. They are spectacular at conveying the vulnerability and longing essential to making a love story like this work. Lah. So as the series progresses and more psychological issues, sometimes the issues are even beyond their romance, come to light. The both actors deliver beautifully nuanced acting by delving deep into their well springs of trauma,
Yeah.
without succumbing to the temptation to oversell the drama.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely love the performances here.
Mm,
I think from the very kind of first time the two of them are alone together in the room, right? In episode one, or episode two, like it's a very palpable chemistry,
yeah.
And what kind of amazes me is that like every time we kind of shift down the timeline,
Mm,
they do feel older, like in terms of
mm,
like the way that the characters are being portrayed, right? Like they do feel older, they do feel more worn down,
mm,
a bit more tired, right? And a bit more cynical for the most part. And like to kind of like see that back to back is quite a joy to watch, right? Um, yeah, absolutely. The facial acting is amazing. As is like most of the time, I'm not a big fan of like long lingering shots on facial expressions per se.
mm,
But I do feel like sometimes these forlorn looks that they have, right, tells so much story in and of itself,
mm.
without us needing to have like a grand like internal monologue, to kind of
Mm.
see that what they're thinking or what they're feeling, and I think that's a testament to the performances.
Yeah, long lingering shots for people who are unaware, like it's not just dependent upon the cinematographer. Well, I mean, of course, the cinematographer is important. Like
Yep.
the lensing and camera work is very important as well. But it doesn't work if the actors are not up to it, like, are not up to showing us what the complex inner thoughts are without using words.
Hmm.
And both these actors are up to it, lah. And also I do have to mention that like wow like nearly half the show is spent with them in bed and
Yep.
with nude scenes lah. So I think with most movies and TV shows they typically use intercourse as cheap titillation,
Yeah.
Game of Thrones,
Yeah.
etc., the sex scenes. But in here the sex scenes are crucial to the characters' understanding of themselves and each other,
Absolutely.
and and to the audience's understanding of their development as
Yep.
people and as a couple. So though the series leaves pretty much no body part unexposed, the sex never seems gratuitous because it's
Hmm.
necessary storytelling wise. They are vital because they demonstrate the instinct that Marion and Connell have to love and honor each other, even though other aspects of their lives often make it difficult to demonstrate those feelings publicly and consistently.
Yeah.
So yeah, both actors do a fantastic job of that lah.
Yeah.
With regards to what you mentioned earlier, like, do they belong together? Are they good for each other? I think
Uh,
like any really really good love story, it doesn't make it explicitly clear.
yeah.
I think it's good because it leaves its climax open ended. It
Uh
leaves
huh.
it up to your interpretation. Whether they get their happily ever after, it's up to your imagination. But I think what isn't up for interpretation is that for all the joy and passion and pain and mess, I think their relationship, whether romantic or as friends, has enriched them as people and helped them grow
Yeah.
beyond what they were in secondary school. At first, right, like I was a bit taken aback by specifically Paul Mescal's casting because I didn't know where the show was going. I hadn't read the book at the
Uh
time,
huh.
so I didn't know I was going to go past secondary school. And Paul Mescal, great actor, not believable as a Sec 4 boy.
Yeah, I had.
Just not.
There were moments where I was just like, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but it progresses on to when he's an adult. So then I understood why he was cast.
Yeah, yeah. But that being said, Edgar Jones, like in any sort of like age that she's supposed to be playing, very convincing.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I think she does look. She has like a babyish face, which makes it you can buy that she's in secondary school, and you can buy that she's in college, and you can also buy that she's an adult. With she just has to change her hairstyle and body language, how she carries herself, and
Yep,
that works,
agree.
brilliant, man. I really like how the show is able to display the many ways that they fit together and the many ways that they don't.
Yeah.
And it's very compelling viewing lah. Like we feel intoxicated when they're together,
Mm-hmm.
but I actually feel like the characters sometimes work better apart. Pages of prose could be revealed with a single sideways glance from Edgar Jones. It's a skill that comes in
Yeah.
handy, given how Marian tends to disappear into herself when
Yep.
she's with another guy.
Yep.
And Mescal himself, given his quiet character, is astonishingly good at making clear what he's thinking,
Uh huh.
even if Connell himself doesn't realize what he's telegraphing.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a bit, it's an amazing bit of acting. I've yeah, it's wonderful. It's Kim Wexler esque, if I could use that. Yeah.
No, no, no. I absolutely agree. Like telegraphing is like exactly what uh, the best descriptor kind of for it.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, like, I'm very blown away by their performance, right? And at the end of the day, it's nothing over the top. It's nothing. That overtly kind of in your face, like, hey, I'm a great actor, anything of the sort. It's just extremely nuanced and subtle and believable, and the way that it's presented to us is a joy to watch.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like we are focusing on the love story because it is a love story. Like it's
Yep.
easy to get swept in there, but normal people also explores, class and privilege,
Mm-hmm.
the impact on abuse, and what seem like silly teenage interactions can actually shape one's identity well into adulthood.
Yeah.
So it carefully explores how individuals evolve as they grow older. It also does something that only the best coming of age stories do, is it treats young adults with respect and
Mm-hmm.
takes their relationships, especially first loves, seriously.
Yeah.
It's well aware that those relationships leave permanent and formative marks on these people.
Agreed. Totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah. And any concluding thoughts before we move on?
I'm looking forward to finishing this up. I am at once kind of apprehensive and excited at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And then yeah, I mean, we'll probably talk about it again off stream.
Yeah.
Yeah, once I'm done with it.
Definitely, man. If you want to catch normal people, you can watch it on the BBC iPlayer, which is available, of course, in the UK, or you can watch it on Hulu. Both are available in Singapore if you have a VPN, so do check it out. Normal People 12-episode miniseries. Don't expect the second season because it kind of contradicts the point of the ending. It's supposed to be open ended. Although who knows, before sunset happens, so you never know.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if they allowed for in now. I mean, it is open ended, but I don't know if they should. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I like open ended endings.
We'll see.
Anyways, yeah. Let's move on to a different type of romantic story, if you could say. My teen romantic comedy SNAFU is an anime that's been running for a while now. I believe 8 years. Uh,
2013, I think.
7 years,
Yeah,
yeah, but
7
there've
years.
only been 3 seasons, so there've been large gaps in between seasons. So before we move on into our thoughts on the show, like give us a little summary on what's it about.
Oh man. Okay, so um the premise of the story isn't as Okay, okay. So basically, for my teen romantic comedy snafu, right?
Hmm.
It's a high school story, and it's about trying to fit in high school. Our main protagonist is a loner called Hachiman Hikigaya, who's
Hmm.
forced to join a fellow loner, Yukino,
Hmm.
uh, and another classmate called Yugahama,
Hmm.
to form the high school service club, right?
Yep.
And it sounds exactly what it is, right? Like, so basically, these three loners are kind of forced by their teacher to kind of come together to have some sort of CCA involvement.
Hmm.
And it could involve anything from like trying to solve people's problems or trying to like help people clean up stuff and all of that, right?
Hmm.
And that sets the kind of premise, or rather the platform for which the rest of the story kind of takes place.
Mm.
um Eventually you find out that the three of them are linked together by an incident that happened in their past, like a fairly traumatic incident in their past.
Yep.
And that kind of like unfolds as they continue to kind of like get to know each other and all of that, as they help fellow adolescent high school friends and strangers deal with the struggles and kind of like the problematic and complicated time of being a teenager.
Mm.
Yeah, so that's as concise as I can get it, I think, without going too much into detail about the many like complex links between the characters.
Yeah, I mean, I agree lah. Like that's a fairly succinct breakdown. It's kind of like one part cynical comedy. A bit. Hiki reminds me a bit of a Holden Caulfield kind of person.
Yeah.
And it's a one part also high school drama lah. So it's a very actually kind of very relatable slice of life high school anime, in a sense that like none of these characters are caricatures
Yeah.
by any measure. They all tend to live in their own heads and have their own all teenagers and everybody in that age group, right, tend to live in their own heads, like they have the world figured out and everyone else is wrong,
Yeah.
and their own drama causes them to miss other people's drama lah. So the beauty of the service club, the thing that they've been forced to enter and to help people, whether they are like cleaning up or cooking or organizing events, it allows them to get into other people's heads and develop empathy for others by understanding other people also have problems,
Yeah.
you know. But Hachiman himself has like a very like unusual way of solving problems. He is a loner. He doesn't see himself as a good person, so
Yeah.
it's a very cynical thing. So he's often playing the villain in order to get a positive outcome for his clients lah,
Uh-huh.
which damages his reputation and his own kind of self-esteem and self-worth. I think he is trying to overcome that as the seasons move forward, and so are the other different characters. Like the two girls who are with him have their own various own issues lah,
Yeah.
that have been brought up. I think Yukino is a bit cold, standoffish, doesn't really have like social skills because of her upbringing,
Uh-huh.
of a family. So she has a different problem there, lah. And so much about what is great about my teen romantic comedy Snafu is it's not just the very witty humor. It's that so much of what they mean is between the lines.
Mm-hmm.
You need to do a lot of like very deep interpretation of what they are actually trying to say, because the characters like Hashiman, Yukino, and Yui don't know how to say what they want to say, so they go in a very like
Yeah.
roundabout, you know, ways of doing it. But through that, it actually really crafts really beautiful dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to kind of dig under the surface of what they are saying to find out what their meaning is, and
Mm-hmm.
it's great. It's very literature in that way.
Yeah, it is absolutely. I think like how narcissistic, right, and nihilistic like Hikigaya
Yep.
is it makes for such a compelling uh watch, just to see all three of them and kind of like the essential philosophies that they have in life, right? Or what philosophies they're starting to build at this point in time in their life clash
Mm.
together. Like so much of the conflict in this series, right, over the 3 seasons has to do with the many confrontations that they have with each other, where they are not actually talking about the thing that they should be talking about, but it gets resolved through that anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's is pretty masterful to be able to do that kind of like so many times, you
Yep.
know. And I feel like as an audience, what endears you a lot is that not only do you get to know the characters over time, right, but you also start to understand each character's own language of affection and anger and all of that. Much like you said, like we need to learn how to read between their lines, right? And
Mm-hmm.
coming into season 3 now, like we're more than halfway through the third season now, like I feel like we're a lot better at that, which
Mm.
makes there which allows, I feel, the writers to put in more in every kind of exchange that they have. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like there's no need to kind of like explain to us, like we don't have to do as much digging to see, um to make apparent what they actually mean, you know.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. At first, they're like, especially in season one, it's actually a lot of the fun is trying to figure out who who they really are underneath, their cold or nihilistic exteriors.
Yeah.
Like who is Yui, who is Yukino, who is Hiki, right? Like really, right? And by the third season, I think we've got a fairly good idea about what their philosophy is and how their philosophy is evolving
Mm-hmm.
due to their interactions with other people.
Yep.
So it's a really really endearing kind of show that is it's hard to say. It's slice of life, right? So there
Yeah.
isn't really like big dramatic things that happen, you know.
No, no. But
Yeah.
it gets played up. Like a lot of the small things that happen get played up, right? Because high school, you're a teen, hormones, and
Mm,
and I think like with these three in particular, just because like so much of their lives are lived in their head, right,
mm,
and so much of their conviction is based upon on kind of like the very narrow amount of life they've lived thus far.
mm,
Like every time those few things come into contact with each other,
mm,
it is pretty explosive sometimes, right? Like it's not dramatic, it's not huge, it's not over the top, it's not overwhelming, right? But
mm,
to them, it is important, and as a
mm.
result of that, like you're drawn into their kind of investment into those small things.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, that's a better way of what I was trying to say, like in a sense that, like, like it's very easy for us as adults to maybe mock the silly little things or the silly little anxieties that you might have as a teen,
Hmm.
But this show so effectively puts us into that situation and brings us back into that point in our lives, that like they no longer feel silly. They feel like like the world is at stake, like with whether you're going to see a fireworks show with Yui or something, like that feels like a big deal. You
Yeah.
get your hopes up, how you're supposed to act, that kind of thing. It feels like a life or death situation, even though it's just two friends going to the mall, or two friends going to see a fireworks show. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I really loved it. Another thing I really really liked. I think this was emphasized more in the first two seasons and less in the third season.
Uh-huh.
Because the third season is more kind of trying to pay off the character arcs. Like the
Yep.
first two seasons is this deconstruction of romantic comedy enemy.
Yeah.
Like I think Hachiman himself is very genre savvy.
Hmm.
He
Yep.
knows the ins and outs of the rom com formula, so he is constantly comparing his life and circumstances with rom coms and curses and stereotypes that are found in movies and like love triangles and stuff like that. And in a more meta sense, the series does a great job of avoiding the typical romantic anime cliches.
Yeah.
There's no accidental groping, there's no romantic sister love, no tear street confessions. So in fact, like the only time a big rom-com anime cliche happens, like walking in on girls while they're changing, for example, it's kind of a punchline of an elaborate meta joke,
Yeah.
so it's great. I really like how they're aware of what the cliche is and how they subvert it continually.
Yeah. I think at the beginning it was especially enjoyable for me when I first started watching, just because um SNAFU came out at a time when like romantic teen comedy anime was at its peak, right? There were a
Mm,
lot of really, really popular ones that were coming out at the time. So this was really, really refreshing because it felt as though like some of the payoffs that we get from Hiki's kind of like machinations, right? Like his active role in trying to like subvert or divert people away from like cliches, like romantic cliches, kind of
yep.
echoed some of the other stuff I was watching at the time. I can't remember the
Mm,
titles, but like it was pretty funny to kind of like see that like his meta awareness adds a lot more to the enjoyment of the thing, because it allows for some very neat kind of like twists and turns, right? Like that most people wouldn't kind of expect, for it to play out. Yeah, and it's rare for us to get a protagonist like that.
Mm.
More recently, there have been a couple of other series that have you know tried to achieve the same kind of like tone for the protagonist, but nothing has kind of reached this that Hachiman Higaya's knack for it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I greatly enjoyed my teen romantic comedy SNAFU to the point where I kind of binged it in a couple of days. The characters are all really great. You know, you get to know. I mean, yeah, the big three lah. Your three main characters: Hiki, Yui, and what's her name? Yukino, right?
You know, yeah,
Yeah. So but then there's actually a large cast of characters that you get to know. You know, it's a whole ensemble comedy drama kind of thing. You know,
yeah,
you get to know their classmates, you get to know people from other schools, you get to know Hickey's like crush from middle school even like comes in, and best of all, like nearly all the cliches common in rom-com anime are avoided or deconstructed.
yeah,
So yeah, so if you enjoy like really, you know, kind of pessimistic witty humor, almost Daria slash Holden Caulfield esque,
yeah.
it's my teen romantic comedy snafu is definitely worth your time. That's how it presents itself at first, but be aware that, like, you know, that's kind of it kind of Trojan horses you into a more emotionally complex
Oh man.
exploration of these characters lah.
Yeah, yeah. It like yeah. It's a lot of fun in the beginning, and that's where they
Yep.
get you. But I mean, like it consistently delivers. I think such a great. It's hard to get consistent series that are this consistent. In terms of like the way that they deliver, like the emotional notes.
Mm. Especially with anime, which tends to be very big and over the top and really spells it out for you a lot.
Yeah,
Um, but perhaps that's just like, you know, because like I watch more shonen than not, and shonen tends to spell out plot points or emotional points like repeatedly to make sure you understand.
yeah,
And I like that Snafu doesn't like treats me like an adult lah. Like
yeah.
I should be able to infer it for myself lah.
Indeed, indeed, and I like that, right? Like what we are kind of talking about with normal people as well,
Yeah.
like the characters, I mean, they're teens, but they take their own drama seriously, and we are also, as an audience, also forced to kind of like not forced, but like it allows us to take them seriously as well, right? And I think that's kind of
Mm.
important. My only, I wish I had a better understanding of Japanese. I feel that the
Mm.
writing is clever enough for there to be a lot more that I'm not able to understand, just from the subs alone. And maybe in the future, if I ever get fluent enough, I'll rewatch it and I'll let you know if there's like hidden stuff that we missed because we
Yeah,
don't
I
speak Japanese.
I do agree. It's weird that like to think that there could be some things lost in translation.
Yeah,
Because you know I can sense that this is a more cleverly written anime than most. So yeah, like I do wonder if there is something lost in translation, or something lost because I'm not aware too much of Japanese culture. You know.
yeah, agreed.
So yeah, it's really really great. You know, it's deep, well written characters. Realistic teen drama, you know, not overhyped or overblown. It's a very multi-layered plot with a strong emotional core where you care about every single character and you kind of don't take a particular side, even though Hiki is your POV character, you know.
Yeah, but sometimes you
There's
do.
yeah, there's several instances where we disagree with him completely and take the side of Yui or Yukino or some of the other characters as well.
Yep.
So very very layered and nuanced, and one of those animes where your main character may not be the best person.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any concluding thoughts before we cap off?
No. I'm really glad you enjoyed this.
Yep.
I thought it was a bit risky. Uh, recommending this, I think, because it's not your run of the mill kind of like, we tend to recommend a bit more serious stuff here, or like really out and out comedy.
Mm.
And sometimes like I feel it's tough, because SNAFU, as popular as it's gotten, right, like in the initial phase, like nobody really cared
Mm.
about it, and it was difficult to recommend just because like it required you to recommend it to someone who was looking for a subversion of like kind of these tropes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it, man. I'm looking forward to seeing whether or not they are able to wrap up as neatly as I hope they will.
Mm.
in this season, or if they're going to give us another season. Apparently, there are rumors that there might be a fourth season, so we'll see how it goes.
Oh wow! But the third season is entitled Climax.
Yeah, so I don't know how exactly they're gonna do it. I mean, it's just a rumor on the message boards at the moment.
Right.
Uh,
I suppose they could do like a Steven Universe future, an epilogue kind of story lah.
I would actually kind of enjoy that. I think that would be fairly interesting to have them all come back as adults and where they are in life, and kind of reminisce about how they've journeyed to where they are now. That would
Oh
be pretty
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely. I mean, I would love to see how Hiki ends up, lah, because clearly we're not going to see his entire emotional growth.
yeah, for
We are
sure.
seeing the catalyst of it right now. So I guess the show will end with open to interpretation, lah. Like, how will Hiki grow up to be? Will he finally become a fully adjusted, well-adjusted person, or will he continue being a nihilistic loner? Same thing with Yui, and same thing with Yukino. Can they overcome
Yeah,
their internal struggles to become, fully fleshed out individuals, lah? Like,
yeah,
who are not codependent on each other to get things done.
agreed.
Yeah, really great show. You can watch it on Crunchyroll.
Yep.
It's also on Hulu and Anime Lab. So a bunch of different places that you can catch my teen romantic comedy SNAFU. I suppose you can read the manga as well. Although we haven't read the manga, but I'm
No.
sure it's a fairly faithful adaptation.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. No complaints from the manga side, from the manga people. So I think it should be fairly
nice. Oh,
close.
before we leave, right? Do you know why there was a 5 year gap between season 2 and 3?
Uh they couldn't find funding for it, if I remember correctly.
Oh, it was a money thing, huh?
Yeah, it was a money thing. Like it became a lot less important. The studio brain base had like some much bigger fish to tackle. So like brain base has done like Bakano and like Durarara,
Mm,
Bloodland and all of that. And like during those 5 years, like they were fairly busy with the rest of these, right? So if you guys are keen and you find and you like Snafu, do check it out. Like Brain Base has come up with some of my favorite
mm,
animes. But um at the point in time, I think especially because season two wasn't as popular as season one.
right.
So yeah, they just kind of got shoved to the back lah. Couldn't find money for it.
I
And also
see.
because of Durara too.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, yeah, but I'm glad that it finally happened, lah.
Yep.
Like after, I mean, there is a, if you, it's not a spoiler or anything. There's a cliffhanger at the end of season 2. So if it was left unresolved, it would have been extremely frustrating. So I'm glad that you recommend it to me now rather than 3 years ago, because because
Yeah.
like I wrote from the finale of season 2 right to season 3 episode 1, so it wasn't like a big thing for me, lah. But I can only imagine how the fans felt.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think most fans thought it had just died.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. I mean, I was surprised that they announced it. I didn't expect Brainbase to pick it up again.
Hmm.
And I'm glad that they did. But much like you, I had to rewatch the first two seasons before going there because 5 years is a long time to remember any of this.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's not like big plot points that you can just like recall off the top of your head. It's very again interior material. You
yep,
need to know these characters, get to know these characters once again.
yep,
Yeah. So highly recommended all three shows. The legacy of Hellsing and Hellsing Ultimate we discussed earlier already. So if you wanna check out how like modern dark horror fantasy shows. Or anime in particular get their vibe, get their tone, get their style. Hellsing was one of the pioneers there. And then Normal People, one of my favorite shows of 2020, miniseries on Hulu.
very good.
You
Yep,
can watch it there. And my teen romantic comedy Snafu is still ongoing. We have 4 episodes to go until the end of season 3. So if you want to catch up, you can go to all the previous sites I mentioned. But yeah, yeah. Highly, and I'm very excited to see how it all ends.
yep, yep. Me too, me too. Hopefully, I mean, like whether it's a neat one or not, I just want to see how the story goes. Like, there's been a lot of investment.
Mm-hmm.
We're both like really really invested to see how this turns out. But that
Mm-hmm.
being said, hey, like if they ever want to like make a spin-off where we follow Hiki in his adult world and the working world, I will watch that too.
Same,
With the
man.
same
Same.
formula, it's very very good.
Definitely. Yes, and we will be back in 2 weeks for our next episode. We haven't discussed what the titles are gonna be.
Yep.
But it's gonna be stuff that we like, lah. So we have QC'd it for you. Till next time, though. I'm Hidzir.
I'm Isa.
And if you haven't caught Genre Equality, our new episode is out last week, yeah, a few days ago actually. So go to our Mixcloud page and check it out, man.
Yep.
All right, goodbye, guys.
Ciao.